Just before he died, Randolph Scott's terrible secret was out. Randy Scott came into our world. George Randolph Scott was born in Orange County, Virginia, on January 23, 1898. He spent his formative years in Charlotte, North Carolina, after migrating from a wealthy family in the South. Scott was fortunate enough to attend elite institutions because to his well-off family. His father was a textile executive prior to his service in World War I. He attended Georgia Tech and the University of North Carolina for a short time to study business and engineering. It was during this time that he gained the self-assurance and self-control that would later establish his character in the film. After returning home from the war, Scott was filled with uncertainty about his future. However, he was encouraged to come to Hollywood after a fortuitous encounter with Howard Greer, a film star. He would never be the same after making that choice. In his early years in Hollywood, Scott kept a low profile. Being an extra was his first job. While honing his acting skills, he would occasionally play little parts without credit. Casting directors were immediately captivated by his towering stature, athletic form, timeless good looks, and elegant Southern accent. In the roaring 20s and early Depression, he appeared in a number of supporting parts, most notably appearing in dramatic and adventure films. But the Western was where Randolph Scott truly fell at home and was himself. He showed an innate talent for Westerns in his early major roles in 1934's The Last Roundup and 1943's The Desperado, characterizing the unwavering cowboy hero. With genuine sincerity and subtle fervor. His honesty, grit, and subtle acting technique earned him widespread acclaim, which only served to boost his star power. It was by the late 1930s and early 1940s that Randolph Scott had solidified his position as a leading man in Hollywood. Unlike a lot of actors who were stuck in repetitive roles, Scott gave the Western stereotype complexity. He was more than simply a lawman or gunslinger, a man formed by adversity and led by justice. He was frequently depicted as having a strong moral compass. Collaborations with filmmakers such as Henry Hathaway and, subsequently, Bud Boder produced a number of critically acclaimed Westerns that have stood the test of time. Classics in the genre include Ride Lonesome 1959, The Tall T 1957, and Comanche Station 1960. Scott was able to deliver because these projects put an emphasis on human emotion, isolation, and redemption rather than violence. Emotionally powerful and profoundly reflective performances. Despite being overshadowed by his illustrious cinematic career, Randolph Scott's private life represented the man's multifaceted personality, a blend of stability, secrecy, and passion. He wed Marion DuPont, a lady of extraordinary status and autonomy. Marion, a member of the illustrious DuPont family of Delaware, was a sportswoman, acewoman, and heir to the Montpelier estate in Virginia, which had been President James Madison's house. On the surface, Scott and DuPont's 1936 union appeared to be a glamorous union, with an air of sophistication, a mashup of the regal American past with the allure of Hollywood. The wedding was reported extensively in society magazines, and Scott's admirers were captivated by the match between the charming, reserved actor and the skilled horsewoman and dancer. Scott was already a rising star in the Western film industry. But even though they value each other and love, their union did not endure. The equestrian world and Mary and DuPont's horses were their passion, but Scott was becoming more and more engrossed in the routines and expectations of his Hollywood job. They were two powerful individuals with completely distinct personalities, ways of living. While he was captivated by the vibrant lights of California, where his career was booming, she longed for the tranquility of rural Virginia, where she could tend to her stables and produce racehorses. A chasm sprang up between them that neither could heal due to the physical and mental separation. Bridge. They were only married for 3 years before filing for divorce in 1939. According to many who knew them, they divorced peacefully, avoiding any public controversy or animosity. While Marion DuPont rose to prominence in American equestrian sports, Scott solidified his position as a legend in the field, enduring cinematic heroes of the West. In 1944, 5 years later, Randolph Scott met Patricia Stillman, the woman who would spend the remainder of his life as his companion. The composure, elegance, and devotion that Patricia exuded gave Scott a sense of the safety and comfort he had been yearning for. Their marriage lasted almost 40 years, which is unusual for Hollywood, where star couples frequently divorce due to stresses of fame and public attention. As a couple, they settled in Los Angeles and created a life for themselves away from the spotlight, after which they settled in Beverly Hills. The restrained and gentlemanly Scott was incredibly faithful to Patricia, and their acquaintances frequently spoke about how much love and respect there was in their marriage. Scott treasured his privacy, even though he was famous, and he and Patricia were seldom seen together at where other famous people in Hollywood partied and socialized. They liked to host small gatherings of friends at their house and go on spontaneous adventures. The couple's elegant decorating reflected their love of art, horses, and the American culture, and their home became a welcoming and comfortable space for guests. West, Scott's marriage to Patricia, who supported him through the decline and end of his career, was a major factor in his profound contentment in his latter years. Patricia Stillman was Scott's lifetime spouse and companion through the ups and downs of their partnership, which lasted until his death in 1987. Difficulties of a life in Hollywood. Patricia kept herself out of the spotlight when Harry passed away, but she never stopped speaking lovingly and proudly about her husband's legacy. They were a rare sight in Hollywood, but their love and commitment stood the test of time, a connection supported by unassuming loyalty and mutual comprehension rather than glitz and grandeur. Hollywood icon Randolph Scott kept a secret that had troubled him for decades as he neared the end of his life. A hidden truth that was revealed just before he passed away. Scott was perceived by millions of moviegoers as the archetypal quiet cowboy, a man of unflinching bravery, untamed autonomy, and unflappable self-respect. Over the course of his 3-decade career, he became a household name in the Western film industry. However, Scott was a very private man who kept his private life out of the spotlight, away from the dusty paths and silver screens. Nevertheless, his quiet defiance spoke a great deal, and in the days leading up to his passing, the long-suppressed truth started to surface. The cowboy makes people believe they know Scott. He confided in a close buddy at one point. Unfortunately, the figure in the mirror doesn't match the one on TV. The ones that, nevertheless, his quiet defiance spoke a great deal, and in the days leading up to his passing, the long-suppressed truth started to surface. The cowboy makes people believe they know Scott. He confided in a close buddy at one point. Unfortunately, the figure in the mirror doesn't match the one on TV. The ones that, a lifetime of internal strife was laid bare by those words, plain but evocative. Hollywood studios upheld a rigid ideal of its stars for a long time, creating stories that would satisfy viewers and conform to societal norms. That necessitated a life of concealment and self-control for Scott. He struggled to maintain his authenticity as both the public figure society expected of him and the private guy he really was. Both in front of and behind the camera, his life became a show. That emotional weight only increased with his years. In the years between the two world wars, Scott's private life attracted ceaseless conjecture, especially due to his remarkably intimate bond with fellow performer Cary Grant. For nearly 12 years, stories circulated across Hollywood about the two of them sharing a lavish Santa Monica beach house. During that time, tabloids in Hollywood claimed that they were the most unique single men, while rumors circulated that their bond went much beyond that of friends. Scott never confirmed or denied the claims, but his quiet acceptances and mild demeanor in later years gave the impression that the two men had a strong relationship. Among the few individuals who, Scott once said something about how no one had ever understood him. We shared a good chuckle. Out came the bickering. Our aspirations were united. True me, he saw, in a community where everyone else wore a mask. Everything had transformed by the 1950s. Scott had also done so. Following the success of his 1962 picture Ride the High Country, he decided to leave acting. An impressive performance that was widely praised by reviewers as an appropriate tribute to a legendary Western film star. However, he was dealing with years of solitude and contemplation away from the screen. Patricia Stillman was his bride in 1944, accompanying her till the day he passed away. However, rather than a passionate romance. Their marriage was characterized by camaraderie, according to most sources. Scott grew increasingly reflective as he aged and his health deteriorated. He frequently reflected on his past decisions and the feelings he had repressed for so long. During this time, in later years, when only his closest confidants were privy to his secret anguish, Scott admitted that he had been paralyzed by the dread of rejection and public scorn for the vast majority of his life. As a child, I lived through a period when standing out was perilous. He did concede that, with practice, you can learn to hide and act, begin to buy into performance. He seemed to be struggling under the weight of the decades-long veil of secrecy, as his voice conveyed a mixture of pride and sadness. Scott was well aware that coming out during his peak may have been disastrous for his career in Hollywood, which had not been kind to those who had dared to cross the carefully established boundaries of its golden age. Scott virtually disappeared from public view in the 1970s, when his health began to deteriorate. His friends said he was shy and introspective, and that he would spend hours gazing at the hills of California. His closest friends and family knew that he rarely spoke about his past, became aware of a feeling of calm starting to supplant the chronic stress he had always endured. The world had started to shift, maybe, and that was the reason. The same Hollywood that had previously shunned him was suddenly celebrating authenticity, uniqueness, and tolerance. His last interviews included. Scott smiled bittersweetly as he hinted at this change. Could it be that I was born at the wrong time? He asked. People can finally be themselves, and that makes me happy. Had I just had that opportunity, it would have been perfect. Randolph Scott was survived by his wife and children after his death on March 2nd, 1987, at the age of 89, in addition to an impressive filmography, but also a personal narrative characterized by inner turmoil and unwavering strength. Those closest to him started spilling the beans on the reality he had buried for so long after he passed away. The legendary cowboy was actually a sensitive, reflective man, and profound empathy. He kept his secret out of shame rather than scandal. His grief stems from a lifetime of pretending to be a hero while secretly wishing for approval. The legacy of Randolph Scott is an inspiration and a cautionary tale even in this day. The cinematic embodiment of the legendary United States West, but his life showed us the much more nuanced reality of being genuine, when doing so could hurt you financially. Courage isn't about confronting a shooter on the street, as he once stated. Sometimes you have to face yourself. Randolph, ultimately, Scott was heroic not just in his roles, but also in the silent dignity with which he carried the burden of a secret he would never be able to completely reveal, while everyone waited for the right moment to comprehend. When he died in 1987 at the age of 89, Randolph Scott left behind a legacy that represented the golden age of Hollywood's cherished Western actors, a combination of strong manhood and subdued grace. His heart and lungs failed him in his twilight years, and that's when he was declared dead. Scott passed away quietly in Beverly Hills, California, the same city where he had spent a great deal of his life among the famous actors and actresses of the golden age of Hollywood. With his death came the final curtain call on an era, the traditional American Western that he had become a symbol of. His towering stature, powerful voice, and fearless screen presence had elevated him to the status of the archetypal cowboy hero. He continued to be an iconic figure even as he entered his latter years. Regard and esteem among those working in the entertainment sector. Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina, the city where Randolph Scott was born and reared, was the site of his interment after he passed away. His modesty, which had always been a part of him despite his celebrity and fortune, shone through as he returned to his southern roots. Success. Although he was born there, North Carolina meant more to Scott than that. It brought back memories of his childhood, the principles instilled in him by his family, and the work ethic that had molded his outlook on life and his profession. His resting spot in Charlotte became a serene site of devotion for his followers. Memorial services were held for fans who wanted to honor the actor who had played numerous heroic roles. For a man who had always valued quietness and seclusion over the clamor of stardom, the tree-lined cemetery was an appropriate and fitting final resting place.